Hey everybody, this is Mike Balsito, co-founder of Product Collective, and we are back for another industry interview live. Appreciate everybody joining us, and I'm really excited about this particular session because we're going to be talking with somebody that I've been following for some time. It's also somebody that we're featuring at our conference, Industry, later this fall. And of course, you can already see him, so I might as well say hello to Ash Maurya. Ash, how's it going?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you're here, and I know everybody else. Before we get started, I just wanted to check in with everybody, especially if you haven't attended one of these sessions before, kind of give you an idea of what to expect. So we do these industry interviews twice per month. So first Monday and the first Wednesday and the third Wednesday of every month, we have these sessions with product leaders, and really they're just casual conversations with product leaders from all around the world, where we love to incorporate questions that you have as well. So we usually focus in on a specific topic, and yeah, it's a great conversation. So if this is your first time, hopefully you could come back for more. They used to be called Product Lunch. So actually, if you go to productlunch.com, you could see there's one scheduled for next month already, and then we'll have plenty more. We're taking off at the end of April because we have another conference. We have our European edition of Industry. So we will be in Dublin, Ireland, April 23rd and 24th. So the time where we normally might do an industry interview will be actually in the middle of the air. So we're going to take off for the end of April. We'll be back in May for that. So if you have any questions, I'm going to start the conversation with Ash, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask it in the Ask a Question section. You'll notice there is a chat on this. Definitely introduce yourself, let everybody know where you're from, what product you're working on, that sort of thing. It's really cool to see that from everybody. But if you have a question that you'd love for me to ask Ash, ask it in that Ask a Question section. The only other thing that I wanted to do was to thank our sponsor. We have a sponsor for today's session, and that's Amplitude. And I know Amplitude is all about helping product people as it relates to product intelligence and analytics. Also, you'll notice in the button, though, they have a guide for understanding user behavior better. So if you click that button at any point, you'll get taken to that guide. And so I definitely encourage you to check that out later on as well. And again, big thank you to Amplitude for helping make these sessions happen. But with all of that out of the way, I wanted to come back to you, Ash, and really just maybe we could dive right in and get things started. Yeah. I know I love the topic that we're focusing on for today because it's actually the same topic of your talk and workshop that's coming up at Industry later this fall, right?
Yep, that's right.
And so love the problem. I know you obviously write a lot, and I've had a chance to follow some of your writing. I know one of the pieces that I read that you put out there, you said that one of the most common pitfalls for entrepreneurs is it's not falling in love with the problem, it's they fall in love with the solution. And I was just curious, like for you, why did that make the top of the list, falling in love with the solution itself?
Yeah, so I'd been an entrepreneur for many years by that point. And looking back, I'd had my fair share of successes and failures. But what bothered me the most was realizing that in every one of those situations, I kind of dived into building something and only learned months later, sometimes a year later or a year and a half later, that what I built was something that wasn't big enough, not enough people wanted. And so that had to stop. And as I kind of dug deeper, I found that it was what I call this innovator's bias for the solution. Is we see a problem and we rush to building a solution and do everything in our waking and maybe even kind of sleep time, trying to put all the resources together, kind of bring this idea to life. And oftentimes we miss the mark, and kind of in parallel, there's this other shift. We are seeing that, at least in the world that we live in today, given enough time, money, and effort, we can almost build anything. I say almost. We can almost build anything today. Some things are still very hard to do. The bigger question isn't can we build it, but rather should we build it? And so that mindset shift was what sparked this shift from solution to problem, and we can get into more about why the problem is the foundation. But to me, that was the key transformation that happened in my mind many years ago. Yeah,
well, and if I remember right, that realization played an impact into you building the Lean Canvas, which I know that's a preferred canvas for a lot of entrepreneurs to use in terms of like organizing and conceptualizing their business model. Is that true? Maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I would say that yes, it is so for everyone's benefit, it is a one-page kind of canvas for deconstructing an idea. And definitely coming from a product background, I had looked at the original business model canvas, and it was too much of a business document. It still was talking about company stuff, like, what are our key resources, what are our key activities. And when I made this shift in my mind, I realized that the customer is really what matters, and understanding what the customer wants is ultimately what we need to do. If you can deliver value to them, usually we can make a business model work. Yes, optimization is needed to make the business model work, but that to me was the foundation. So I kind of looked at that canvas. There were a lot of things that were very good about it. So I tried to, be respectful. It was licensed under Creative Commons. So I began kind of playing around with the boxes. But yeah, to your point, I would say one of the more fundamental changes was introducing the problem box. Because if you get that wrong, I find that everything in the business model just falls apart. If you build a solution that doesn't solve a customer problem, they aren't interested, your channels fall apart, your pricing falls apart, your unfair advantages fall apart. And at that point, the business model just completely crumbles. So that was, by all means, the foundation and the reason for the Lean Canvas.
Yeah, and this is something that, I'm sure once you incorporated that, you probably got feedback from entrepreneurs, hopefully product people too, that have used that canvas. What was the feedback when they made that switch? Was it hard for entrepreneurs to take that in, or by incorporating that, was it actually something that sort of made a lot of sense for entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so I found that it definitely was a lot more appealing to the makers and the entrepreneurs, simply because many of them, we don't like writing business documents if we don't have to. This didn't come across as that. This came across as a product description. This is what I want to go build. Let me answer these basic 9 questions, and maybe I'll get some better insights. And to me, the thing that really kept it going was that people were seeing beyond the solution. They were beginning to question some of their assumptions, which created this addictive loop. People just began to do more of it. Fast forward to today, what I have been very impressed by is seeing just the number of different roles that are using the canvas. So when I look at the business model canvas, I typically see consultants, I see folks in the business departments for the most part. But if you look at the Lean Canvas, you see product managers, you see engineers, you see even students now. A lot of students are using this even at the high school level. Hey, I've got an idea. Yeah, let's just deconstruct it on a canvas. So to me, that's very encouraging, because good ideas can come from anywhere, and anyone should be able to fill out one of these things without requiring an MBA or a PhD to do that. And so that was a very, very key design principle, is making sure all the boxes were intuitive and simple. Anything that required one to go and pull out a book or look up. And we tested these, of course, with workshops. Whenever people would question, how do I fill this box? We try to make the box simpler. We try to make it more intuitive, because that fundamentally was our design goal.
No, that's great. Well, I want to go back to, the topic of the day, right? Love the problem. And again, let's not be obsessed with the solution itself. Let's love that problem. I'm curious, a lot of the folks that watch these industry interviews, a lot of folks that are in Product Collective, some are entrepreneurs for sure, but many are professional product people, right? So they're product managers at large organizations, maybe VPs of product for growing startups. I'm curious if, from your perspective, the concept of loving the problem, not being so obsessed with the solution itself, but loving the problem, is that something that product people should take to heart too, just as much as entrepreneurs?
Absolutely. So I would say that the same uncertainties and risks lie whether you are bringing a new product to life in a startup environment or in a large company environment. Again, especially today, because customers have lots and lots of choices, when you stop delivering what they want, they don't sit there and troubleshoot and try to tell you and give you a lot of feedback. They simply switch. They have a lot more options than they did before. And we are seeing this just in the pace of disruption. I can bring up a whole bunch of names, from Barnes & Noble to Kodak, all the classic Compaq, those kinds of names that were with us not too long ago. They aren't there today. Some of them ignored what the customers really wanted and just kept pushing their business model through, and those customers just switch away. So those barriers of switching, those things are no longer there. So it's even increasingly important for large companies to in order to stay relevant to their existing customers is they have to be on top of building things that they actually do want and staying one step ahead of the competition.
It makes a lot of sense to me. And one thing that comes to mind, at least in terms of a follow-up question, is just if we as product people buy into that. And by the way, I think probably a lot of product people that are, in this session, they would buy into that, right? Makes sense. But how, once we accept that, how does that change our day-to-day, sort of the strategies that we have in place for, managing product? How does our life change as product people once we do accept that?
Yeah, and that's the trickier question. So I even have this on my shirt because we ourselves find ourselves many times taking shortcuts, and we see a customer feature request, or we see something we want to go build and we rush to building it. So it is like, I liken it to the first principles in science is you always have to go back to the fundamentals, to the basic, to the basics. And so the way this works in every day is that whenever we get an idea for a new feature or something we want to go build, we have to ask ourselves as a team, do we have evidence of the problem it's going to solve? And if the answer is no, the way it changes things is it forces us to say, let's go and get some of that evidence. So even customers have this bias for the solution. If you look at your backlog of features, you will typically see them saying, give me X or build this for me. Those that have been in this business have been around for a while, you sometimes will see that when you give them what they want, they won't even use it. That's because they don't spend the requisite time understanding what job they were trying to do or what problem they were really trying to solve. And so we have done that too many times to where now, even if we get 5 customers ask for the same thing, we'd actually get them on a call and try to really uncover what is it they're really trying to accomplish. And that has actually sometimes entirely changed the feature we actually do go out and build, because we can build something better than what they even envision, because they are not in the business of owning the solution box. We are as product people. So that's how things change, is that every time you have an idea, we always look for evidence of, and I even make it more specific, we look for evidence of monetizable problems worth solving. So sometimes it's not just enough to throw something that's a nice to have, because again, there too, you'll get lots of people maybe engaging and it could have a secondary purpose, but if it doesn't create monetizable value, then the business model just stagnates. It doesn't really grow. So there is a prioritization that has to happen even within the problems that we go after.
Yeah, no, well, let me ask you this. You have mentioned customers, they can be solution oriented too. I'm curious if you have advice for product people that they're like, all right, I want to be in front of customers. I want to focus on the problem. But again, right, knowing that customer, they might be trying to bring the conversation towards a solution. How do you best sort of navigate that?
Yeah, so there actually is a new canvas. So you mentioned the Lean canvas, and I would say that was a great starting point for getting people to make this mindset shift from problem to solution. But I find that because the innovator bias is so tempting, a lot of innovators will simply fill the problem box as a requirement for the solution they want to build. And what I mean by that is they'll fake or invent problems. Sometimes unconsciously, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so we sometimes trick ourselves into not really searching for the right problems. So the way we actually get at that, there's this new canvas that we recently launched called a customer forces canvas. It's built around a lot of concepts from jobs to be done. I think you had Bob West last year giving a talk on many of those types of topics. But it really starts out with not even problems, because if you go to a customer and say, what problem do you have? It's like, you're assuming they can self-diagnose themselves and really get to root causes, and that's not always the case. Many of us have gone to the doctor's office or have gone to therapists even because we can't self-diagnose sometimes the problems that we even encounter. So this interview format really doesn't even attack the conversation with what problem do you have. We really start with what outcome were you trying to achieve? What job were you trying to get done? I noticed you asked for this print feature, but what would you do with the printout? If you can get to that, sometimes maybe the printout isn't the right thing. There could be something better. So we've had people asking for, say, I want to be able to print the Lean canvas, but we realize they really want to do a presentation. So instead of a paper printout, what if we gave them a slideshow feature? And they're like, oh, we'd love that. And they use that more than the printout. And that's the kind of insights one can gather when you just ask that that other question, which is what are you trying to get done? And then, of course, dig a bit deeper. So that there are more elements to kind of prioritizing and kind of ranking, and that's what that new canvas helps you do. But to answer your question, it is really a conversation that we can have with our prospects or current customers to really understand what are they trying to get done, what are they considering as existing alternatives, and within that, is the job getting done? Isn't it getting done? Is it not getting done well? That's where there's a room for innovation. That's where you find the more interesting problems we're solving.
That's great. By the way, as a quick aside, I see some questions coming in. That's great. If you have more questions, there's the Ask a Question section. Ask them there. I'm just going to ask a couple more to Ash, and then I'm going to go right to audience questions. So I want to make sure I could get in a lot of those as well. But the one question I did want to run by you, as product people, I think, this conversation will help everybody challenge themselves to, again, just think more about that problem itself. Hopefully we're not all rushing to the solution already, but if that is the case, maybe now folks can pause a bit. But at the same time, you do ultimately have to get to a solution. So I'm curious, like when is the right time? How do you know when you should be, okay, we've taken in enough feedback where, we're ready to focus on that solution? What does that look like, for you and you product folks?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of qualitative validation, and then of course we do a lot of you mentioned Amplitude. We actually use their product. We love their product, so a little plug for them too. But we use a lot of metrics to verify what we have built is actually working. But on the qualitative side, though, the power of qualitative learning is that you don't need lots and lots of conversations to get to some conclusive insights. So you find that the pattern matching comes rather quickly. So if you structure your conversations well, usually within 5 to 10 customer conversations, we have a pretty good sense of here's what they're trying to get done, here are the problems they run into, and the solution becomes obvious. Once you understand the problem, the solution, to quote Charles Kettering, is half solved. I mean, so it's actually kind of just falls out at us, and that starts kind of the process of us, being able to define the solution and then start building that. And there too, we try to embrace speed as much as possible. We'll kind of build a partnership with those early adopters, show them maybe a screenshot or a mock-up or a demo of what we're doing while we're building it, which our customers like to do because they love to be heard. So they're like, yes, what we talked about, this can potentially address. And then maybe a week or two later, we might give them an early access release. So we do partial rollouts and then full rollout. So we kind of embrace that kind of a model. So we don't go off for several months, build something, and then hope it works. We're doing a lot of this incremental checking and learning, and sometimes having to make adjustments even along the way, because the way we might build a solution could be done better once we get usability feedback, for instance. So that's the process that we tend to take. So it is not I now shift from problem into solution mode. It's not a stop and go. We call this continuous innovation because it is really a continuous process. On any given day, we could be having problem conversations. We could be showing solutions to other people. And it's just very much of a continuous, ongoing type of process that we advocate and we run ourselves.
That's great. Well, I do want to get to audience questions, but I would kick myself later on if I didn't address the fact that you're going to be with us in Cleveland, Ohio at Industry, which I'm really excited for. I know you're going to give a talk, but also facilitate a half-day workshop. And there might be some folks here that are interested in that. So I thought maybe you could just share a few details on that for folks that are interested.
Yeah, so I would say this is a kind of a high-level 3,000-foot intro into the topic. The talk will get a bit more into real case studies. We'll use examples to kind of illustrate just the kind of insights one can get when you shift your mindset from the solution to the problem. You find that even the competition you're going after can drastically change. When we only think solution, you think one startup is competing with another startup. But I found that email and spreadsheets have been bigger killers of startups than other startups. That's just one example. So we'll kind of go over that. The workshop piece gets into a lot of the how-to techniques. So I talked about interviewing. Lots of people who have never done this, always have the anxiety of, what do I ask? I used to have that. I used to be a technical closeted geek myself. So when I've gone and talked to customers, it's like, well, what do I say to them? What do I ask them? Many of my interviews didn't go as well. I just got a bunch of, false positives, if you want to call them that, confirmation bias. So in the workshop, we get a bit more into this new canvas and kind of how-to techniques for really extracting problems without even mentioning your solution. And that's very key, because the moment you mention the solution, you can taint the conversation. People can get into a defensive mode. They start asking you questions, and that then changes the dynamic of the interview. So it really is all about kind of learning what they're doing versus what you want to pitch them. So it's not really about your solution in the beginning. So we'll get into a lot of the tactical techniques and pitfalls and how to structure those types of interviews, how to even set them up, like how do you even start talking to people. So those types of things we'll get into.
That's great. Awesome. Well, I want to go to some audience questions. There's a few and some are getting a lot of votes, so I might as well start at the top. This one's coming from somebody who's a brand new product manager, and basically they've been handed a roadmap that basically was created a year ago, but it's been orphaned ever since. And their question is, where's the best place for me to start? I got kind of handed this roadmap. It's from a long time ago, kind of archived. What do I do now? What might you suggest to that person?
Yeah, so I would first say that I'm not a very big fan of obviously product roadmaps that when they get down to the solution level, when it's here's your next 18 months of things you're going to go build here, every quarter we're going to push these features out. It assumes that someone can see into the future, and customer needs change so quickly that you want to kind of break that down. But that said, if you are given that, you are given a roadmap, I would really start by using a pull versus push model. And what I mean by that is start with your first release. Let's say it's 3 months out. Look at what's on there in terms of what you're building, and you can run these similar types of exploration interviews. Ask yourself, who are going to be your ideal best customers for the things that you're going to roll out. If they're existing customers, try to get them on a call. Try to set up some advisory boards or things where you can make those conversations easy to have, and start saying, in the next release, these are the themes of what we are building. I'd like to talk to you about how you are doing some of these things today. And then you can get into looking for what I talked about, looking for evidence of this is really something that's top of mind. If 3 months from now we deliver this, there is a high likelihood that people will appreciate it, people will use it, people will buy from us or keep buying from us. And if you don't see that, then you might want to reshuffle the roadmap. It could be that something that you were planning 9 months down needs to move up, or vice versa. And so those are the types of things that I would do to prioritize that backlog of things that are on your roadmap.
That's great. I mean, it's true. It's like even if that was important a full year ago, things might have totally changed for customers since then. So it sounds like revetting those key problems is a big deal. So yeah, I appreciate that. Another question came through on what's the best way to kind of elicit problems or issues from customers that they may not even completely realize quite yet. And so I guess maybe I'll add to this, like if a customer doesn't know if something's a big issue or problem, should that be something that we're trying to solve for? Do you have any feedback?
No, yeah, and that's a question I used to get a lot, as you can imagine. And the classic example I like to use is Uber. If you had gone back 10 years ago and asked people what problems do you have with taxis, people would say, well, I don't necessarily enjoy them, but they are what they are, and that would be the end of the conversation, because you wouldn't be able to prompt a list of problems. Today, though, those of us that have shifted to rideshare have very, very explicit reasons. When I travel international, I will prefer a ride-sharing service because I don't have to have local currency. I don't have to know the city. I don't have to worry about how much it's going to cost. All those anxieties are solved by those services out there. So I can be very specific today, but 10 years ago, I didn't know that these things would even be possible. And that's the challenge we run into. Now, the way you tackle those situations, again, and I talked about this just kind of at a very high level, is that in these interviews, we don't ask customers ever what's keeping you up at night, or what problems do you have, or rank these problems for me, because that would require them to be, innovators. It would require them to see, their problems and also kind of tell you how they could solve them. So what we instead do in these interviews is we try to ask, what are their experiences? It's a bit like from the design thinking world. I might ask someone, tell me about the last time you took a taxi ride and walk me through the process. And if someone can't remember, I wouldn't have I would end the conversation because they probably cannot give me, actionable information. So I want to find, obviously I might find someone who is a business traveler or someone who is a tourist in another city. I want to ask about their taxi ride and describe the experience to me. When did you order the taxi? How long did it take? When you got in there, what were you feeling? What happened? You get that story out, and in there you will see lots of emotion. You will see lots of friction. You will see lots of anxieties. That's what Uber kind of saw, is they experienced this themselves. They were in Paris, had to walk 20 blocks in the rain at 10 p.m. at night after an event. There were no taxis. The ones that stopped wouldn't take their credit card and kind of drove off. So they came back and said, this is a problem for us. Being entrepreneurs, let's build something. And they started with something, and that, long story short, became what the company is today, just by exploring further, anxieties and troubles and inertia that people had. I know it's a longer answer, but that typically is what that interview would look like.
Great, I appreciate it. I did have another question that I can relate to. So this is coming from somebody that basically, they have a hard time. They struggle with the problem mindset when sometimes they know that they need to make UI UX changes, but it's really more about kind of polishing the product versus something where it's like creating some sort of brand new thing that has a more clear, kind of cost benefit. Like you could see that very clearly. Yes. So kind of iterating a product versus creating something completely new. Wondering your take on that.
Yeah, so I wouldn't go overboard. So not everything has to be this, because this is obviously more steps for you to bring someone on and say, I'm going to change the fonts, or I'm going to change the look of the app. What do you think of it? Depending on your customer segment, that can be something that is not worth their time. If you were in a B situation, I'm not going to call a big client and say, hey, Cisco, take a look at, we're changing the fonts here. What do you think? And it's just going to think I'm crazy. So those types of things are things that you do to make the product better. And so if you can measure that quantitatively, as long as you don't make things worse, some things are rather obvious. And so I wouldn't use this elaborate process there. This is really for the times when you have more uncertainty, when you're building a new feature or you're changing a flow drastically enough to where there could be risk that what you are doing may not work. In those types of situations, this more kind of extra steps or more elaborate process will definitely help in both preventing many bad rabbit holes, but it will also kind of help you optimize and refine what you're building through this continuous feedback that you will get.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more question. So,
sure.
Looking through here, this one has a few votes. It's an interesting one. So it says, this particular person, they feel like they've nailed down their problem. They've nailed down, they figured out the best way to approach it in terms of a solution, I suppose. But they're having a hard time thinking about the best way to actually communicate this now to customers. They feel like they understood the problem for the customer, they've solved for it, but it's hard to communicate this in a pitch that makes it seem like this is really compelling. Have you ever, do you have experience on that front? Just what kind of feedback might you give to this person?
Yeah, so the example I'll give, and this is actually a little bit of one of the examples I use in the talk as well, is just look at Steve Jobs. When he was alive and he would communicate products, things no one had ever seen before, he didn't do this by telling you what new things you can do with his products. Like when he had the iPad, he wasn't saying, oh, the iPad is good for all these things that nobody wanted to do. He would talk about things you were already doing. So the key there is compare your product against the existing alternatives people are struggling with today. Or maybe not struggling, but you can make it a struggle. If you can show a better way of doing things, you can create switch. So the way when he had the iPad on stage, he wouldn't talk about 10 new things you can do with the iPad. He would talk about 10 old things you were already doing, but you could do much better with the iPad. So he compared it to the laptop and say it's more intimate than a laptop. You can take the laptop to bed because you would be too geeky or nerdy. Your spouse or your significant other will kick you out of the bed. But you can take an iPad to bed. And that's actually something that I still do, and I will do I'll do some work on there. But if I take my laptop in, it's like, oh, that's just not, work's not allowed at this time. So that's how he did it. So that's one example, but he did this over and over again. If you look at his keynotes, it was never about, we have built this brand new tablet, get in line because we are Apple and just buy it. He would show you through the demos that he gave how this was better than a smartphone, how it was better than the newspaper, how it was better than a laptop, and that convinced lots of people to switch not to a new product, but to fire their old product and hire a new product. And that is the key of how you pitch your product, because if the problem is there, if you found the problem, you need to just surface that in the conversation. If it's obvious enough, people will make the switch if your solution's better.
Yeah, that's great. Well, a half an hour went by really, really fast with you, Ash, but I appreciate the time, and I appreciate everybody joining us. I know, again, you will be with us in Cleveland for industry, and people can, visit industryconference.com and check it out. Hopefully, y'all can join us, and you could say hello to Ash there. But I know that you write a lot. I know you're active on Twitter. Could you just let folks know how they could follow you online?
Yeah, so I guess my handle is just @AshMaurya. I know it's a bit harder to pronounce, but if you go to LeanSTACK.com, you'll find a lot of my contact information there. You'll also find my blog where I do write about this. The whole problem theme is a big topic for me right now, both in terms of research and in terms of some of the tools we're building. So if you look at the last 3 blog posts on there, they're really on this topic. So if you want to dig deeper, even before the event, and if you can attend, there's just a lot of content there that you could get your hands on.
That's awesome. Well, thanks again, and thanks everybody for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you next time here for an industry interview. See y'all later.
All right. Bye.